Shir Nefesh Chaim Beis, Chelik Aleph, Dibur HaMaschil HaMaches Ani Me'Avram, Tofresh Ayin Daled, Omud, Tof Nun Gimel. Yeah. So we were holding by the union of the Iskashus Mitzad Hadas of the union from which is Mukhrach, or the union Hadas the Atik, which is Shera and the Kruma, the Agav, the Avira, the Kruma Agav Moicha Stimoa. And we saw that that is Penimius Atik, in that Avira is Shera Pnimis Atik, and that Pnimis Atik is Machriach, that there can be a Hamshocher from Chitzenius Chochma Stimoa into Chochma Hagluya. And the moving in is that not only is it Machriach, the Chochma Chitzenius Chochma Stimoa, but there's even a Hamshocher Pnimius from the Pnimius of Chochma Stimoa, which is Mamish Atik, into the Giluim, how they come down into Chochma Giluya. And we saw that was the Lashon that it's Moisif Ashleimus Yosera in the Inyan of Chochma. In other words, not just a Teisefes Giluya, the Inyan HaSeichel, but a Shleimus. And in that Gufa, Ashleimus Yosera, meaning a new oifen and a new teikif altogether in the oifen of the Gilu HaSeichel. And we saw that came mitzad the Iskashus, what he called it Das Nela. But since it comes from Nomaila Lamata, it comes from the inyan from Das the Atik, or that's the inyan from Pnimis Atzmius Anefesh, by the Odom, then that's Goydom, Koyach, Makasher, Milmaila, from the very etem, and that is Machaber, the Chitzenius of that Bechina, which is Chochma Stimoa, into the union of Chochma Gluya, in an even from Teisvus or Ribui, Befrat, as we'll see at the end of the chapter, that it's also Koilel in itself, Ashpor Pnimius. What that means that through the union of the Limud, the Kabbalah Soil, we saw the Bapoil Mamish, what did it mean? The union from Iskashras, Mitzad the union from this Das Nelam, we saw that was a koyach on the part of the Odom to be loimed and oisik, be Yonei HaChochma, be Kabbalah Soil Davke, in a way that he was nice and esatzmei legamrid to the Limud, the Beliko, Inyan of his chashvus, what's and when, as they say in Yiddish, what is the Inyan that he's got to learn? Berega hazeh v'chulu, no, he gives himself away completely, and that's poil that the hamshoch is shalei bahadroge. Dainu that the Inyan from the koyach hamaskil, which is the chitzenius of Chochma Stimoa, or that receives this koyach of Hiskashus from the Avira, the Sharia Agav Kruma de Moicha, and that poils Ainin of Atzlacha and Gilui Shleimus in the Inyan from Soga Giluya, or the Inyan from Chochma Giluya. So that's what we saw, that's what we were holding. The Kasher Makriach Atzmei, we saw about 2/3 of the way down the page. Who Inyan Eisa Chatera B'der Kabbalah. Maybe we'll start with that line. Who Inyan Eisa Chatera B'der Kabbalah Shegam She'ein Le'rotzen Hu Machriach Es Atzmei. In other words, we saw that sometimes the Odom can find himself in a matzav where he doesn't have a tzloch in a limud, that is not nimshach, new giluim from the koyach hamaskil, and I feel it could be sometimes that he doesn't have even a rotzen kol kach le'inyan alimud, and the Rebbe said he can't be machriach etzem a rotzen mitzad atzmo, he can't be machriach it. So then he said that the only way to be machriach everything is that he goes to a higher inyan where he's given over even l'mayla meritzoino, and he's makusha in the etzem inyan of limud b'derech kabbalah sale, or then that causes that everything is nimshach and afil the rotzen, as they come to us, that afil there'll also be a gilei rotzen by ha'inyan. But that's not that you machriach the etzem rotzen, but just b'derech mamele, it comes from the etzem, the koich ha'ishkasha shelamayla mihadroga. So that was the inyan of Eisach HaTorah b'derech Kabbalah Seil, shegam she'en le'rotzen hu machriach es atzmei, וכאשר מכריח עצמי, הרי הוא נויסן עצמי אל הלימוד. The inyan from machriach means that he just gives himself away entirely beliko chespoines. The ene kavona she'achreich hu rach chitzenius u ki'ilu kafoi, the Lashon state. Legabi dinen aziv u ki'ilu kafoi shade, with the ganze Lashon. In the Gemara, ki'im shemachriach atzmei v'noisen es atzmei b'kol atzmusei el alimud. So he said it's not just that he's machriach himself with a truchana, how do you call it, hechreya. He just forces himself, beliko kilo tam v'oimek in the inyan. Now he said, what do we mean? Makriach is a noisen atzmi kol atzmusi al limud. He just throws himself into it because atzmus. And therefore we have to say that there's a koyach atzmi which is poil here, albeit it's not an open tam because he doesn't really have any tam or rotzen davke. And it's not mitzad that he's already been masig the main inyan, but he just throws himself in b'chol atzmusay el halimud. Therefore, it's not that he's keilu kafoi shindalad. On the contrary, he's throwing himself in with the ganze atzmus. Shezeh inyan adas shemakasha es ha'atzmus u'mishum zeh shai b'zeh hechreya. So k'moishkosu b'mochim acher. So the Rebbe says that the inyan adas is that it's makriach es ha'atzmus. So that's a very deep lotion. We see that the Iker Nakuda of Das is what we call involvement. The Lashon. If you look in Perek Gimel in Tanya, and you see that it could be he's got Chochmah Haskola Tzayinin, it could be he's even got the inyan from Hasoger in the inyan, of in order that it should be Mamisha Kinyan Benafshe. And it should be Pnimius Hamidus, and he should be Makusha, Elainian, and you need the inyan from Das. And so what is the inyan from Das? That he himself becomes involved in the Zach. Not just that he learns it and just that he knows about it, but sikhli, or he's masig a tifa hasoger in the inyan. Well, that doesn't necessarily involve him, Kayadua, that the inyan from Moichin have a certain tendency to be even makif when they get to Matthias. They can sort of know things but keep away from them. Ve'ilu the inyan from Das is that the mensch becomes involved in what you might call arangischlept, b'chol inyanov in the Zach. And that becomes part of his life, as you might say. He lives the inyan b'pashtas. And that's the inyan from kol atzmusay. The Das is a koyach atzmi ma'id. And that brings the whole Adam, kamoishu, as a living entity, into commitment and involvement in the etzem, what he understood. In order that he and the thing become mikshua achas. So therefore, said the Rebbe, we have to say, Lefise, that Das is got an ability to be makasha atzmas. And therefore, when he gives away kol atzmusai, well, that's what the koyach hadas. And particularly what we see here, it's a Das elyon ma'id, and that's what we call Das nelam. Even legabi stam Das, it's a inyan atzmi. And therefore, that brings the whole atzmus into the inyan. Mishum zeh shaypa zeh hechreach, and therefore we can call it a inyan from hechreach. So if he gives his whole self away, because then why do we call it hechreach? So we could say that what happens to him is that he doesn't really realize that he's getting how do you call it, to use the expression, reingezogen, drawn into this Inyan and becoming committed to it, because if you ask him, but he doesn't have any particular Inyan to learn or to be given over to that particular Inyan, because we saw maybe the Rotzen is not functioning of the Chulu. And the fact that all of a sudden his whole Atzmus becomes involved, well, that's a koyach which is kilo chutz mimenu, which is being makashe him in a way that he himself doesn't really understand or realize what's happening to him. And therefore we call it hechreyak, even though it doesn't look hechreyak at first glance, because he himself is giving himself over to the Inyan. Now, why is it called hechreyak? Because mitzad all the sibis agluim and the koyachas agluim, he wouldn't have been involved in that. And the fact that he's now drawn to it, b'kol atzmusay, well, that's a form of hechreyak. In other words, a koyach elyon is bringing him b'li yediyotzei and b'li hargoshosei b'gilui. And therefore we call it hechreyak. Ve'alidei zeh gam boim giluim mikoyach hamaskil. And through that, the Bamela becomes, we saw that the Koyach HaMaskil was Chochmas Timoah, and it was Chitonius Chochmas Timoah, and we saw that causes that he gets all of a sudden all the ideas. In other words, the Koyach HaMaskil drops him or pops him out all the Nakudas into Seichel Hagolu, and he begins working in the matter, even that he wasn't able to prior to the whole Kabbalah Soil. Ach, says the Rebbe, Shorish HaGiluim, even though the Koyach HaMaskil is the Gilui of Chochmas Timoah, I know Chitonius Chochmas Timoah, but that's the Shorish of that whole Ashpoah is really in Lamaila Mikoyach HaMaskil. In other words, in the Kurmash Agav Moicha, the Avira of that Kurmash Agav Moicha, well, that's the union of Atik, and in the Odom, well, that's the union from Kabbalah Soil and Iskashus, what we'll see in the next chapter. It's really union from Tainug Nela. It's a very high madreg in Tainug. It's okay. Achsherish Agiluim, Haimil Maila Mikoyach HaMaskil. Hainu the Shorsham Hu B'Chinas Avira Hanal. But that was, we saw that was where Atik was Shoire. Omamela Hagiluim, Haima Nailim B'Yisah. And therefore, B'Golui, he is dealing with things that come from the Koyach HaMaskil, which means Hasogas and Haskolas. But the Haskolas and the Inyanim, how they come later into Hasoga, are much more and more qualitative and higher, and maybe we could say they come with more Naviyah, they're coming continuously more than what he had before, because when he was working purely mitzad the koyachas how they are, then he didn't feel a particular rotzen, and he didn't feel a lot of hatzloch. He didn't always get the idea of a ka'etza b'zeh. Over here, says the Rebbe, the giluim anailim b'yisa favus, because there's a koyach pnim v'atzmi which is prompting them to come lidei giluim, and therefore they come in a much better and a much more qualitative and hatzlocha dike oifen. V'halizeh al derech beis hakoichos hanal. He said that's similar to what we saw in the earlier chapters when we get to the inyan from Chochmah. That we saw there were two inyanim in Chochmah. There was inyan from Hafshota b'Chochmah, and there was inyan from Yeridava v'hamshocha into Bina. And we saw that the Hafshota was kilu the inyan of Chochmah outside to Pnimis HaChochmah, which is really shaykh l'mayla HaChochmah. Ve'ilu the Hamshocha, that was the inyan of the gilu towards Bina. So we saw that Talui, the Tluim Hor Bahor, that according to the greatness and the highness of the Hafloah, so is proportionately the Hamshocha. In other words, that the higher his Hafloah is, and the more he's miyuchad mitzad Chochmah in the Etzem, then the greater is the Yerida into Golui, and the clearer and more what you might call begolui and understandable is the Gilad Chochmah into Bina. So similarly here, just like we see over there that the two inyonim are proportionate one to the other, he said similarly, Kamoi Kain, B'Chochmas Timoah, this galas M'Chinas Chitonius Chochmas Timoah, Bo B'Kuyach B'Chinas HaPnimiyah. In other words, that just like over there, the higher was the inyan of Afloah, so more was the inyan of Gilui. That's in Chochmah Gluya Atzmai. Now we're talking in Chokhmas Timor. The Pnimius of Chokhmas Timor is the Chati. The more the hashpoa from that avira, the sharia gabi kruma, the meicha, the more hashpoa from that, the more you read it into Chokhmah HaGaluya, even from Gilui Naila B'Yesa in the Inyan HaSeichel. So we see that similarly in Chokhmah Timor to what it is in Chokhmah Galuya, that the Inyan Aliyah, that's what's moisiv, the Atzlacha in the Yerida. And so therefore he says in Chokhmah Timor that this galus b'chinas chitzinis Chokhmah Timor bo b'koye b'chinas hapnimiyos. Umamele yesh b'zeh b'chinas hapnimiyos. Since it comes mikoyach hapnimiyos, then says the Rebbe it's nika b'zeh also the inyan of the pnimiyos shuzeh shleimus yaseira b'gilui hachokhmah. Not just atzlocha, not just giluim nailim, but shleimus. In other words, as it were, a recognizable, perfect aspect of that oifen of Havana. In other words, that people notice that there's some sort of summing up power, which is it's very hard to go beyond it, and there's a certain ever convincing pshitas about the whole Inyan, which is obviously very deep and comes from a very high madrega, and that's called shleimus. Yeah, shleimus. Yeseda begila achochma, and the dogma, like people read a sikha or Inyan from the Rebbe, when they get a certain inyanim, and you just feel the conviction of that Inyan that is poil on the hero, that he just sees that there's boros is there, atachlis amitius was there, below shach lahafrich, lelechent misaviv. No, that's the nakudas Inyan, and that's what we call shleimus in the Arum and Arum. Uber Chokhmah HaGluya nisbor liyel perikuf tzadik ches. The keshelo yesh koyach hafloa, gam koyach hayiridu hu choser. He said, if there's not koyach hafloa, if he doesn't have first of all the sense and the bittul which takes him up into the inyan of hafloa, say inyan, then gam koyach hayiridu hu choser. Like since they're dependent one in the other, and they're proportional one to the other, as if mitadeh is a time. He's not mamik in the Inyan, and he's not given over batachas to the Inyan, he doesn't have the Inyan hafloa, he doesn't sense the great profundity of the Inyan, so therefore he doesn't have the Yerida ela gole also not. V'chan b'chokhmas timor hu shemoisav shleimus. Over there, it's not over there, it's just that he doesn't have the koyach ha-Yerida if he doesn't have the koyach hafloa. But here, so that it's not just that one is dependent in the other. One, if he's got the inyan of the avira, agabi kruma, the gilui, which comes from the Kabbalah and the giving himself away entirely, so then the ashpah is in such a way that it's not just one being dependent in the other, no, one is moisifa shleimus. So here we see this lesson that occurs kama piyomim shleimus. But that's more than just gilui mutzlach or gilui boiven harotzui, but it's a from perfection, a from shleimus. So we have to say that a chocham amiti is able, and it's his tafkid, that when he gives out in yonim that come from kabol sor amitius and from mesira amitius or inyan chochma beliko pnias and beliko inyan klau menet etzem nasinose le inyan chochma. So then he's able to give forth a dover sholem. In other words, when he gives it out, it'll be perfect mikol tzad. Whatever way you look at it, whatever kushias or steers you might try to ask, you see that be'i and anocha and following up the Indian, see that ein lehem mokim klau, or you might say that you leave over the Indian from pilpul and the Indian from chipus kushias, but and your whole Indian is to be megala that Indian begoloi. And therefore we see that by Chassidim, the Rikya Inyan beneged to a Dover Sholem, which comes from an Emes Notzi and an Emes Rebbe, is to Ibel Chazan. They say Chazan Asicha. You don't give over Sikha with all of sort of kashas and tirutim and fragen all of sort of steerers and bring me mochi macha. You give over the Inyan, the way it is. And the more you give it over the way it is, the more you just say it b'diuk. b'lashonos shenema v'chulu, then the better it is. Either a Tosafos Maila that you're able to give it over in your own voice. No, that's already a deeper Ishkashus der Kabbalah in the Inen. Also, because the Inen is a Dor Sholem, then the Inen is not so much to investigate it and Bafasahin and Tzarich. The Inen is to give it over Kamoishahu, because all the Shlemus has already been fixed up by Chokmas there. More Bepinim Yusa, the Etzem HaNefesh. Being as it is, or clear for Etzem Gile Elakus, has already fixed it up. It's already, it's already a perfect zach. Rafa says the Rebbe, that's the similarity of the two inyonim and their connection. But here in this case, it's not just a inyan of one being tolu in the other, but one is like a shleimus because of the hashpor ha'atzmius of the other. And so therefore, there says the Rebbe, Achaike, well, that's all tremendously good. He said, Aike, Masha Efshel Lovei Gam Lepnimis Chochmas Tibor. He said, the Ike is that through this whole kesher, that is nimshet, the pnimiyas, into the chitonias, then that shows, or at least it leads to the fact, that there's a possibility to come mamish into pnimis chochmas more. He said, Ein ze rak masha a pnimis moisif oe b'chitonias v'is galas, he rak chitonias chochmas more. He said, what you can eventually come to the pnimiyas is not that there's a certain trace of the pnimiyas in the inyan of Chochma Gluya. Well, we said there's a trace of the Pnimis, and that's the Shleimus. But no, he said it's not only that. Or B'yemes, he said, Gam Bahanau, who is Galus Mipchinas HaPnimis. Even in what we just mentioned, we pointed out there was a certain Gilead of Pnimias. But here we're not talking about, in this sentence, we're not aiming just at the Gilead of Pnimias, Alidei, these Kashras, other Pnimis with the Chetonias. He said, but we're talking about an Efshorias to reach Mamish the Pnimias itself, that you can go into the Pnimias Bi'atzmacha. He said, Ki'im HaKavona she is Garas B'Pchinas HaPnimis Chokmas Dimoa Mamish, that there should be Mamish is Garas of the Pnimius. He said, V'zeh B'Koyer Choyza Davke. That's like we saw in Beneget to the Inyan from Tshuva at the end of the last Maimah. Well, that Tavki Alidei the Inyan from the Aliyah Momata Lamaila Alidei the Makabli. And in the Inyan from the Staukus Momata Lamaila, but there are Choyza or Alidei Zeh you can reach Mamish the Inyan from Chokmas Timar. So we have to understand then what is the Inyan from Oyer Choyze, even though he said Beneget to Yom Kippur in the Siyum of the previous Maimah, that was Inyan from Tshuva, and Inyan from Tshuva Kedelibe, Tshuva Amitiyah, V'chulu, is of a B'muven Tzeh, but we're talking about the Seder of Haskolah, the Seder Gilei HaChochma, and the Seder from Limud HaTorah, B'Kabbalah Seil, V'chulu, then what is Inyan of Oyer? What is Inyan from Oyer Choyze Davke? I mean, in Torah, the whole Inyan from Torah is Milmaila Lamata. You get into Inyan what you've been given, and you come with Nitan, you mispalpul, you mavarer the Inyan, and you come with the Maskana Abrura, V'Achreza, the Maskana Amitius, if you got the Siyata Dishmaya, V'chulu. And here you can come eventually through this Kabbalah Seir and Das Nelam, you can come to the Inyan from Gilui, Geda of Gilui from the Pnimius B'Teich HaChitonius V'chulu. It was the Inyan from Oyer Choyze. So we'll see as we go along now. We're going to sort of look in the Hemshech Kol Inyonim. Was it the Inyan from Oyer Choyze B'Inyonim Ha'Ilu, and that reaches Mamish the Inyan from Pnimius, which is Atika Mamish, Moichet Atika Mam. So we see that Sochosov, it's a little bit dependent in, well, I wouldn't say a little bit, it's dependent B'midah Mutsuyim, it's in the Aveda Makable, in the Aveda from the Nishomas, Alei Alamata, there has to be a Inyan from Oyer Choyze Davke. Alidei Zeh, then there'll be the scholars with the Aliyah in Yonim. So as the Salt Shaila, was it there Oyer Choyze, and L'choira maybe will be out of Toyein, but Tzedek Mesuyam, that's already been I said, well, it's already been. That's the message of the Rebbe, that Chayza Savi Shem given. I the Rebbe say, what are we doing around here? And so we're doing around here that we got to be ready to be makabel the Teitzah different. That we got to be ready to say. So it's interesting. I spoke to an old friend of mine in Australia just now on the phone. That's one of the reasons I came down a bit late. A real friend of mine, you know, Benjamin Altes Constim. Yeah. He's a Goyzer Meshchist. He's one of the few Meshchists in the whole world. Well, there's a few of them. He said a very good tale. He sort of pulled me in, and then he dropped me off the end. You know, he sort of drew me into an argument, and then he just dropped me off the end. So what was it? It's written that Rabbeinu HaKodesh came back after he passed away, and he came back to make Kiddush for Bnei Beis. I stayed in the Gemara in Sektek, after he'd been, after the Yistalgus, he came back to make Kiddush on Friday night. And he would have kept it up, he would have come regularly, but then he heard one of the Shchiners talking about it and so on, and then he didn't come anymore. They stayed in the Gemara. So doubtless the Rebbe is not going to be nispol. Somebody will be talking about it to the Shochan. In our days that'll even be a mila. But Hamilton's given a chisaron, so the Rebbe didn't come anymore. Amir stated in Rabbi Akiva Eiger, Rabbi Akiva Eiger writes on the Giloy Nashas. Rabbi Akiva Eiger writes that his Bnei Bayis were Yetzer B'Kiddush. That since he came B'Gufay, and as given B'Gufay, B'Beisov, that he was, they were Yetzer B'Kiddush. Because other people want to say, how could they be Yetzer B'Kiddush? He must have been, how to use the expression, he must have been a ghost. How can you be Yetzer Kiddush? So Rabbi Akiva Eiger says, no, he came Mamish B'Gufay, and the farm say Yetzer given B'Kiddush. So he started getting me into a whole pilgrim. He was saying, no, so for Nes, and you can't be Yetzer Kiddush with a Ma'aser Nisim, and it's a Nes, and a Dazanes, and a Zanes. You know, he can't be Moed, and he was sort of driving me ahead. So I answered him a teretz that once Rabbeinu HaKodesh actually walked in the door, then that was already Teva. The Nes had given Fatima. Once he walked in, this is Shingavon Teva. And remember, he said, I see you know Mishkachas. So I said, what's this? Yeah. He said, no, he's a Pasha to Teretz. He said he never died l'chatchila. So he said, since he never died l'chatchila, he just became Knesset. So I thought that was really a bomb. You know, I'm pooping away about it's already no longer a Nes anymore, it's already Teva, and I've already got it. And everybody's age with Rabbeinu HaKodesh is Kiddush, and he said, he said, bist du schon nicht gemischcht? So I said, was it nicht good? He said, it's a portion of Torah. He never died like a chila. He just came in whenever he wanted, and everybody was yaitsim with kiddies and show you. Not bad, eh? I was very pleased with that. I thought to myself, wow. How's it written? Nitzchuni bona nitzchuni. Other people say, ich geboren. He's probably older than I am. He's a young man, Benjamin. He's not a young person anymore. He's a young man. Anyway, show if Amir come to Islafisa, that's Bekoech, so Bekoech Chayza. He was the Chayza. So the Chayza now is to say, we are ready and we want the whole year, and we're ready to be miskabel. What is going on? That is the Chayza. Also upon you. I see that I'm not drawing any bias with all these.
What's Oir Chayzer Bichlal?
Huh?
What's Oir Chayzer Bichlal?
Well, we spoke. Oir Chayzer means going back no matter la mile davke. The inner from Shua, the inner from the Dalek Shua, and the inner from Tzayke. Yeah, my inner from Pnim is alleen no matter la mile. Limon is inner from no mile la mat. So, what's it on the Chayzer? So. Miroiv Chibus HaInyonim, I mentioned Chayzer, so I got into a bit of a, how do you call it, what they call in the modern language, a discussia. So now we go back to where we were. Okay, she said, B'kol hanal yuvan de chokmist, ba'o bechinis mamuta. That's how we began the chapter. Yeah, dachitzenius, yeah, moker lechokma. Yeah, Yeah, it's Chokhmah, is it? Just lacking the little thing here. Upnimiusei hu pnimis atik mamish shesosum be'etzem. Umikol mokim hu Chokhmah. Because that's the way it's a mamuta. We wanted one bechina, which is mechaber from both ends, the two extremities. So sof it's still Chokhmah, even though it's moiches timor the atik. Nonetheless, it's still Chokhmah. V'hainu she'eno atzmus mamish. Shari hu Chokhmah. He's not mamish atzmus, ki sof is Chokhmah. And yet, nonetheless, we say that atzmus is shoyre boy or nimta boy. We'll soon see about that in the coming chapter. Ve'ena me'aner tzolim shari sosum be'etem. He's not mamish from the ner tzolim, so the fact that he's ein atzmus and he's Chokhmah, that's the kesher with the ner tzolim. Ve'ena me'aner tzolim shari sosum be'etem. U'mekol mokim hu kamu hu saner tzolim ki sof he's a bechina from Chokhmah. Since he's sof he's one inyan from Chokhmah. Mitzad the Chitania Shaboy, then he's got a certain kesher, simtzakos of his Chokhmah, he has a certain kesher with an Atzolim. Or Mitzad Pinimi Yusei, then he's mamish shy to the Atzmas. V'yal ken yechilim lowe, l'bchinas ha'atzmis to Chokhmah stimor. You can reach the Atzmis of Chokhmah stimor. Alidei zeh lahagil l'bchinas ha'atzmiyos. And therefore it's possible to come mamish into the inyan ha'atzmas. V'inyan hu the pnimis moiches timor b'chin savira the das nela. V'hu ha'machriach es koyach ha'maskil lahaskil milmayla lamata. V'hu eisach ha'teira b'kabal v'sil. That's the avodah mitzad mekabel. Shenoisen atzmei lo zeh. He gives himself away completely to the inyan. V'gilu yas kolas. Really the Haskalas, they're really coming from the Pnimis, Ve'achmias, Ve'gam, the Koyach Oyer Choiza. So we see then that even in the Gilui or the Chokhmah Gluya, there's a trace from the Pnimis, because Sokos of these Haskalas, which reveal themselves in Chokhmah Gluya, they come through the inspiration, as you might call it, of the Moichet Atiga, the Indian from Pnimis Atik. And therefore they have in themselves a certain shleimus, like we pointed out. However, not just a aspect of it, a heker, as you can see that's coming a mokim pnimi b'yetzer, but a gilui mamish kipshude pnimis chokhmah stimor, and that's the inyan of oyer choiza. So, how do they say? We should do it. So how are we going to explain that? So here we go. This is quite a piece. How do we sort of work our way out to this Oyer Choiza? Is quite a piece of work. And the truth of the matter is that this whole chapter is like a tremendous lead into the whole Inan, and then in the coming one we sort of hit our old, how do you call it, non-friend anymore, the Golas. We hit the whole the Oyer Choiza, which comes from the Minan HaGolas and the Inan HaGeula, Mamish Papashtis, B'chuli. But in the meantime, for this evening, we're going to just make a start on the, how do you call it, the Arainful, how to say, the Prusdor, to bring us into the Amitius Ainian, where and what is the Aveda of the Oyer Choiza, which reaches Mamish into Pnimius Adi, into the Avira Achmai. V'inyan hu dehine mashkosu b'zoya be'inyan. You remember earlier back, I don't know how many chapters ago, a good 25 chapters back, something like that, we brought down a posik from Yeshaya Novi, what is written there, I'll give thanks to the Eibishter because you've done wonders, and stated amunas oimen, or something like that, and I'll give thanks to you, I'll admit to you, because you have done amunas oimen, you have acted in a way of amunas oimen, like a faithful faith keeper. That's the pasuk. So we brought down from the Zohar over there that what was this union of a Siso Pele? Was it a pshat or Siso Pele? So he brought down from the Zohar Kodesh, Kisuya ulavusha de nohira da'atika. This in Pele is a kisui and a lavush to the oir of Atik. In other words, that there's a oir of Atik mamish kamoishahu, and then there's a lavush which is kilo machase, and even as we might call it malim boifan masuyam, of the Indian of the Gilui of the oir of Atik. What oir means, a Indian from Gilui, a Indian from Teicha from Gilui, and through that helim, which is a helim atzmi, it on the one hand hides the Indian from Atik, and on the other hand brings it kilo kamoishahu. Yeah, alidei seh we're able to be makabu from the Indian of Pnimius Atik. So what is that Indian that is malim, and yet at the same time, even though it's a helim, it itself is a atzmi. So really you've got just like two atzmiim which are relating one to the other, but the second atzmi has got the koyach to, as it were, be malim somewhat like Abida, the Seder Lamatamizeh. That's what we saw over there briefly. We mentioned here, we're going to deal with it in more detail. So he says that Indian, it's brought down there in the Zohar, that's a kisuya and a lavush of the nohera of Atik. So he says, liyesh she'ena b'bchinas achiza, the b'chinas Atik, liyesh she'ena b'bchinas achiza b'kli, v'harihu k'moi oer b'loi kli, al kein ena b'bchinas helem kol kach. So we saw that Atik, being as it is, Amitis Pnimis Atik is Bechina Taktoina Sheba Ma'atzil. This is of Mamish Elakus, Mamish Gilui, from Kaviohol, the Eibishti himself. And we saw that what is the union from Bechina Taktoina, but that itself is a form of a Helam Azamin. But what's going to be the Koach which can be Malim? That's the Shaila. So the Indian of Atik, being as it is, Mamish Elakus, it's not really shy to be Milim on Elakus, Be'emet. Yeah. And therefore, the Etzeminian from Atik, being as he is, or Atzmi, then you can't really have a Kli which can really be Mila on him. And therefore, albeit he's a Indian from Helim, but being like a Beloy Kli, he's a Behelim Kol Ka. So whether the pshat einu behelim kol kach, ma aluchera de havana in that idea that it's like a oyer beloi kli, being as it is a oyer atzmi mamish, gilui atzmis mamish. So we have to say that the pshat is that einu behelim kol kach means that the bevadai helim mesuyam yesh. Oh, that's a helim by definition, not that something else is malim of it, but being as it is a oyer atzmi, it's just too high for the makablim to be makabel. That's a helim mitzad the very Indian of the Indian itself. But it's not helim, so of course if it's really there but gilui, it's just that the makablim can't quite be makabel that. And therefore we say it's not helim kol kach. Because the mitis musik from helim is when something is misalim toich mashu. When it's misalim toich mashu, ulai yesh dugma lezeh, that we find in Torah Oyer, the Alter Rebbe over there in Parsha Vayero, the Alter Rebbe brings Benegeh to the Atzmas, and he says that the Atzmas, Arei Atzmas Begolui, the Atzmas is Begolui Bekol Mochim. This is Einu Shayach Lahalim Alov, and he says, V'lochein Anoshim V'ami Ha'oret. Anoshim V'ami Ha'oret, so Imrim, Baruch Hashem, the Alter Rebbe brings us. Therefore they say, and they mention the name of the Eibush, they mean Atzmusi is Baruch. Eim lo yodim mishum inyonim, and that the father, the etzem is really Begolui. It's not Begolui, but it is. It's Begolui in the sense that everybody is there with it and everybody's aware of it, just that they can't really, how do you call it, Havaya Elokeinu Zeh, they can't really say right at this moment of a taken from Miyad, they will be saying it. They'll be saying, Hina Akenu Zeh, Havaya Elokeinu Kivinu, what they're going to say. Alicha. Kunto is it that the Atzmus is begolui, and Mitzad Atzmi is begolui, and I feel Mitzad the Mekablim is begolui, but they can't really take him because Hagilui, because they're just by definition, they're not in that league, as you might use the expression. Lo Bazeh. Not that he's Nelam boys in Alidei Marshu. Der Vater ist nicht Kinine von Helm Amiti. Was über so, if the Ine von Atik is euer Atzmi, what is yeah, mildly at the Ine von, at the Ine von Atik. If we're going to say that it is Nelam Beis Joev, then what is Milim of it? So we're going to see that, how do you call it, only something which is, as it were, Menei Ubei, something which is its own Indian, it can be Mila of it. It's a politic idea. It's something which is be'emes, bedugmas article. It's not mamish atik begilui bepoil beduk kemoy amoke. It can be mild. It's a very musa haskel. You have to be careful. You know, we shouldn't be mild of what we stand for. The emes Hillam cannot.
Brought down a marshal from the tortoise. The tortoise that it covers itself up. The turtle that covers itself up. The snail.
He says it's a hedgehog.
Ah, yeah, that's a Ravushim and Ayobay. That's a slightly different in it. That's a slightly different in it, but it's specifically. Is it Dimoin Laka? Yeah, but the touch is a tough is something which is me'ain or meduk mose. Das kann mile sein auf der Sache. Yeah, so I had a dogma in my mind, but now I've forgotten. What I forget. Oh, yeah. I see we steht dort, like habe Juntes Kislev. Yeah, ze steht in Biurim from the Rabbeim. Adavke Ayid he could bring to such a hill. Adavke I go at least can't miles sign up for so viel. After we Adavke Ayid, but the Skitan otherwise it wouldn't have been a Azam in Hill. And the same thing with you Beis Thomas. Die alle was gebracht zu der Maasah und Poel gewinnen, die alle in Jon, der Weid, Mamish Kulam. Im Lo Kulam is Rubam, der Rubam, ja, der Weid. Mamir, it's Tafke, Yemenei Upei.
Some were even Hasidim.
Well, I don't know if they were Chassidim, but they were from Chassidim. Yeah, they were Nimsha. They were Nimsha from Chassidim. Yeah. Einachanam. I'm going to say that the Rebbe can give out a very deep opinion here that you got to have something which is kilo minei ubei that can be mildly martin of an atik. So, umisalem, but it's not by Hibchinaselem kol kach, but it is misalem at the end. Umisalem alidei achochma davki. Mimnesh kol madreges chochma harihu b'chinas achiza be-kli. Mitzad echad, Chochma's got what you might call the tzad balabati shaboy, that it's always an achiza b'kli. If you talk about koyach ma, excellent at the verb of Chochma. So it's got the inyan from koyach ma. So what is koyach? Koyach is a inyan from kli kol shehu. It's a inyan which is the inyan from kli. Oh, that's the inyan. That's the one only difference between oil of a koyach. Yeah, oil is just the inyan from Gilead. Yeah, b'pshitas. We built here Hagbala, we ledina from Kli, but that's in from Koyach. And Mamir Koyach Ma indicates a in from Kli. Yeah, so he says the in from Davkim Nation Koma Dragas a Chochma, he brings a Chiza Bekli. Vehine a Kisui de Chochma, Einze Kemoy Alavusha Machase, Einze Kemoy Lavusha Machase, Ki Ima Shatainuk, Nase Beginners Chochma. Oh, he said it's not like a lavush. I mean, even we call Kalim lavushim, even though there's a difference. The Emma says there's a chilik in Madregas Advarim between lavushim and Kalim. Or but B'derech we say the Indian from Kalim is a lavush. There's one Indian which is machasafa a traitor Indian, or it's a kli kibul to a traitor Indian. The Hainu de Yoher. Yeah. Over here says the Rebbe, are there any from Chochma which becomes a kisui? Yeah, ki atoa sees a fele, and there's all types is kisuya. Yeah, because anything which is muchus is called pele. Yeah, so he said that's what the tainug nase beginners Chochma. Pele dikazat. The tainug atzmai becomes Chochma. In other words, not that Chochma and tainug are zwei inyonim. The tainug is mislabish in Chochma. No, the MSC is that Chochma is a form of a yerida and how do you call it, hafrosha. It's not even from the stalsel. It's even from hafrosha. Atzmi is from the inyan tainug, or that becomes Chochma. And therefore we see that the inyan from Chochma is connected by even atzmi with the inyan of tainug. And that's the inyan of the nahida Chochma. Or that Baruch HaMavrik, but that's already a low level in Chochma HaGluya. As soon as the mensch gets it, he lights up like a, how do you call it? Like a light, he's more like a oil duck, which lights him up completely. But this is the amitis inyan van oine. And this is the inyan van Tzahavu, pon of the Rebbe Avu, Motzach, Toseftecha, Chadata, the famous Yerushalmi. Where's the Yerushalmi? You know the Yerushalmi, the ganze story there with Rabbi Avu and Rabbi Yochanan, with the ganze inyan. Oh, I can see that everybody is sort of limping around and saying Ad Mosai v'chulei. It's a mirror, we have to leave it for the moment. What is the story there? Oh, it's written that when Rabbi Avu found a new Tosefta, or it was Niskalatim, a new Tosefta, then his face lit up like with a zah light, that a Goysha Matronisa, she thought he was some sort of weird, seicher that was into all sorts of good. And she tied that these weird soccerim, they sell all these forbidden things, and when they do a deal, they land up with this tremendous. So she saw him find a Tosefta Chatat, and she said to Rabbi Yochanan, "What do you keep this guy for a Talmud? He must be a seichel in something very." So Rabbi Yochanan said, "Wait a minute, I said, my Talmud is on." Oh, and all of a sudden he realized that that's a Megushim Dikakov and a Goysha Matronisa. She's at the Kedei Kaf Megushim, that when he found this tremendous light on his face from a new Tosefta, that she thought that was.
So what you're saying is that Chochma naase Tanug, not Tanug naase Chochma.
Huh?
Chochma is naase Tanug.
No, you're going with Matalamayla. That's an ishgid in this part. That the Tainug is Nasechok. In order to come down into the koiches of the Adam and be mashpiyah, Momayla Lamata, then the Tainug has to undergo a lavush. But the lavush is kilo he itself. Right? And it makes a thing, or it's kilo megala, a mafrish, mi'atzmaya, inin, called Chochma, and that's really the inifan. Atik Palavach. The fact when Rabbi Avu found this Tosefta Chatat, it's come by him, the Ha'oras Ha'oinig Bo'ifan Mufla. Tzahavu Pono, he just went, he lit up like a light, Kipshute. And therefore, we see from that, we learned this over there, but in the meantime, before and weiter, so it's become a little bit, how do you call it, dusty, the whole music, that the inyan van Oin Tainug itself, or that becomes Chochma. In other words, the levush from Tainug is its own self, in another form. In other words, the Tainug is misalim inside Ainim, which is really Zochot of its own self. Yeah. In other words, that like he Tainug, the levush maneu, but he's got a good point. He said, "Vehina ya kisui de Chochma einze kemoya levush." כי אם מה שהתיינוג נעשה בבחינס חוכמה, דה פנימיס בעצמס החוכמה, היינו בבחינס פנימיס חוכמה סתי מוה, הוא בבחינס התיינוג העצמי שנעשה בבחינס חוכמה. So he said the pnimius, from Chochma, which is Chochma Stimor, in our particular inyan here, he said that is pnimius v'atzmius hatainug shenase the inyan van Chochma. Not that there's Chochma and Tainug somehow or another is yoyer into Chochma. No, Chochma and Tainug are really the same Mahus, no, das ist Tainug, in Azamin Oven, that it becomes Kilo a Lavush. But it's not a Lavush, it's really Oisa HaMahus. It's a manit, that it becomes a commotion is Bu'el Li'il, Perek Reish Gimel, Ubezehu Misalim, in what is the inyan from Keser, Pnimis HaKeser? In what is it? Misalim, B'mesha Naso B'chinas Chochma. It itself becomes its own Lavush. It itself becomes Ayin Shel Chochma. And then now we understand that it's not that Chochma is a Kli to the inyan of Tainu. No, Chochma is Be'emes Tainu. No, he's Tainu in Oven Show. Koyach, not a inyan from Oyer. He's Tainu. Tainu gets Chomiton in the music of Koyach. He's become Keilu a Dover. What you might call a Dover Musuyam, and in that prat he's Mailim at the Amitius inyan of Chochma. Of a soft Kosov, he's really Oisama, he's Oisama. Omamile, moven de B'chinas HaKisui, ein ze rak shemachase u'mailim, ala ize koyach shel ha'mailim mimeno. So it's not like a normal kli, which is mailim u'masta, a kli shel ha'mailim. So now he's going to be mad with the Rebbe. Whole beer that a koyach shel ha'mailim mimeno is b'derech klal, b'derech hishtalshus, is mislabish inside a koyach shel ha'mata mimeno, and koyach shel ha'mata mimeno is megalehim, but b'derech kisui u'levush, כמו שהדרך בשטלשל זה לבעול ובכל העניונים האלה. ניטוב תם אוהב. לא באופן כזה. He said it's kilo that the Tainuk itself has become its own lavush. It's become its own inyan, which is Chochma. He said, כמו כל koyach tachtoi. שמלביש לkoyach להkoyach עליין, ומעלים עליו, כמו ואילו ועולו כהי Gavna, Shahin Koiches Multolim Zemeze. They're really two different inyonim. Ubezeh Shemalbish Oisai, Hu Malim, Olav is Malbish that inyan, Revo is Malim Olav Bemida Mesuyemes, the Helem Azeh, Eno Helem Atzmi, it's not a inyan, Dainu, Loima Shakoyach Elim Bo Bishinu Yamauz, Vanase Koyach Tachtoi. It's not that. When they call it Seichel Mislabish in Midas, the Seichel Mamish becomes Midas. Now that remains Seichel, that remains Midas. Ki Mashem is Labish boy. Omamela Einze Atzmus Koyach HaElyen, Ki Im Ha'oram Imenu. It's not that the very essence of the Koyach HaElyen becomes the Tachtoi, but just the Ha'oram Imenu is Mislabish, like the famous dogma of Midas and Seichel. A Ha'orav and the Seichel Buvad is Mislabish in the middle. The koyach hatachten shemaylam olav ein ze helem gomo. The gamle acha helem meir horas koyach ha'elin ronon. That emes midas al pi aveda, you can see the inyan hamoichin in the midas, even after the midas become a midah keinu b'shari inyonim and ilava olav. Mashenkin behelem de chochma shemalim al atainu ein aboichin kozeh. Meyacha she'inyan hahelem Ushatainuk atzmei unazu b'chinas chochma ubezehu mishalem. Harei akisui v'helem hazeh hu atzmi. Period. What do we mean by atzmi? Hainu shezehu atzmi satainuk mamish v'nazu b'chinas chochma. And he said ubezeh mishalem b'chinas atainu v'atzmi u'b'chinas helem gomo. So due to all sorts of reasons, we're going to have to hold it tonight. I'm going to play a very old game that Rav Mendel used to praise it. And he used to say you have to finish with a difficult point. So saying Kilo Muksha, in the middle of people won't be able to rest till the next year, and they'll always, in the middle of the night, they'll be waking up and saying, what is this? They won't be able to rest, and won't be able to have any manucha until they come to the next year. So that's what we're going to do right here. But here we see an amazing thing. We see Kilo 2 inyonim noigdium zelazeh. It's like two contrasting inyonim. And Amir Tashem, next week it's already, Bein Hazmanim. How it's going to be. If you guys are going to be ready to learn with the Al Inyonim, and if I'll be ready to learn Bein Hashem, Yisbarach Havoch Haponim, we'll see. If not, we might have to leave this metach for quite a while. Here we see two inyonim which are mamish Kilo Seisrim Zeh. Here we see that the Etzem HaTainug in itself becomes Chokhmah, and in that respect we call it Alavush Atzmi. It's killed the same thing, just in another form. Well, then the Rebbe says, and that's what we finished off, that's why I'm leaving you on this, that he finishes up by saying, but Im Kain, Zeh Helem Gomo. Up to now, the Helomas of Ilova all over the Shtaus is great, and they're not really Helomas, because two separate inyonim. Or where the Etzem is Mailim Avzich Alein, Kilo. And the Etzem becomes its own Lavush, and the Lavush is Mailim, well then he said that's a Helem Gomo. You can really, you'll be not able to recognize in the Dover HaMailim that it's really where it came from. You can see certain inyan, and it's possible mibachutz to be aware of inyan ploini. Yet I know the tzal of upon of the Rabbi Avu v'chulu. Obviously, it's of course this is Mailim. Ja, Helem Gomo. Hoe doet het die etzem alleen? Wie het is een van Helem Gomo? Het should be pinked verkehrt. The Helem should be nika beklau. Pinked verkehrt. He said the dafki where the Atzmi becomes its own Helem. Although is a Helem, a Helem Gomo. And the other Helems of Seder Shtossos are nothing like that. He said, who are stimus the Chokhmah Timor, and that's why, at least we'll give you one little thing to take home. That's why it's called Chokhmah Timor, because Tafki, it's hidden. It's a hidden thing. It's a Dover HaSosu. Yeah, it's a Dover HaSosu, but it's really the same thing as Taina. So have a good evening, my gentleman. Is an Al-Khafani, take out the ene van Musa Haskim is bederig Tzachus Kemuven, Mr. Einlein and how do you call it, Musa Dike Pshetlach and Kaita was there. But you see that sometimes you can think you're an Atzmi and it could be you're a bit of a hell. So you got to be careful. But whatever.
What about Chofzai Nada?
Chofzai Nada. Yeah, well, that's it. And I think we've answered the whole Chofzai Nada, Dr. Yvonne friend, except it still remains a little bit of a kasha of Ferenc Fididichet. And I think that what I gave over from Ben Yoman Alta, that answers it. Mamish Bud. It's not Nisim, it's not Nisim, it's not Kiloi Tchias Hameisim, it's not Kiloi Hameis. He didn't die like that.